This is Lance Williamson coming at you with this week's Devo. Things that have been going on in my life. It's been a pretty busy summer. In May, I had the opportunity to go to the Grand Canyon with a grad, Taylor Swimiller, and visit that, and it was just beautiful and awesome. Just sometimes you just sit and marvel at God's creation and what He's done, and that was just a really cool experience. I've had many weddings this summer. I got to visit some campus ministers and a campus ministry out at Truman State in Missouri. That was a fun time. And while I was out there, actually, I was running and got a stress fracture. So I'm currently in a boot. So if you see me walking around, you can give me a hard time about it. And is this God's way of telling me that I should stop running? Maybe, but I'm going to be ignorant and do it anyways, like I always have, and persevere until something worse happens. Maybe, I don't know. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But some things that God has taught me this summer is just how and why to make space for rest, the importance of having a Sabbath and knowing when to step away is important for your soul and your longevity and your relationship with God, and just how you view Him as well and the life. And to focus on what's important and what matters and the basics, and to know when to slow down, pause, and take time to step away and to intentionally make time for friends. Those are some of the things that I've learned this summer. I just want to remind you too that we have our summer giving initiative that's been going on all summer that helps us be able to do some of the events throughout the school year, and will benefit you students. So if you have a job and you're working, we encourage you to give back to things that are going to benefit you throughout the school year. So you can give on our app or online as well. This week's Devo is on Malachi. And so if you have not read the book of Malachi, I encourage you to pause this video right now and go do that before continuing, because there will be spoilers ahead. So I assumed you have read Malachi if you're continuing on at this point. And so first I want to talk about prophecy and prophets, to remind us of what a prophet is, what prophecy is, and what it's not. And so a prophet is God's messenger, God's mouthpiece, and all the prophets brought a message, a present message to a present audience. Prophecy is not about fortune telling or predicting the future, even though that is what we have made it. That is definitely not what it is. It is all about present message for a present audience. And in every single prophet, there is both condemnation, but also hope. There's both curses, but also blessings and promises of blessings. So things to look for. And every prophet is either what we call source A or source B. Idolatry or injustice is kind of the two messages that are brought up in the prophets. And so Malachi takes place right around 430 BC. So what has happened up until this point, all throughout the prophets, is we have your pre-Assyrian prophets. Assyria was one of the first few empires from the north that was kind of attacking Israel, and they were on the horizon. And then eventually they captured the northern kingdom. And so you have your Assyrian prophets during that time. Then we venture into our Babylonian prophets when kind of Babylon conquers Assyria, and they're kind of on the horizon about to conquer the southern kingdom. And then they do, and people get shipped into exile. So you have your exilic prophets. And then Persia conquers Babylon and allows some of the Jews to return home and to rebuild their temple and their community, and those are what we call the remnant prophets, and that is where Malachi takes place. The temple was reconstructed in 516 BC, and Malachi again is in 430, and so there's this hope to return home, to rebuild the temple, and they do. but it's not as good as what it used to be. It's not the glory days of King David, and a lot of them are discouraged and disappointed at this point. But there's always a reminder of that we can't go backward. We cannot go backward in life. We can only go forward. We can reminisce about the glory days of our life, or man, I just wish it used to be like this, or it used to be like this a few years ago, or if I could just go back. But we can't. We can only go forward. And in this, they lose heart and lose some hope. And their heart's not in it. Their worship's not in it. They've just become very complacent in where they're at by 450 BC and are losing their heart and their relationship with God. And Malachi literally means God's messenger. And so, whether or not Malachi was his real name or if that was just a pseudonym, that can be debated later at a different time, but something to think about. And Malachi's message, he challenges people to honor God properly in their worship and dealings with one another, and to think about their heart posture and where it's at. And in this Persian surrounded culture, there's all this pressure to cave and to assimilate and to fold and become part of the culture, where Babylon was, hey, we're going to come in and militarily conquer you and force you into physical labor, and you're going to lose your identity that way, where Persia was almost like a buy-in of like, you're buying into the culture, hey, all these things are appealing and we want you to be all about Persia and buy in. And so there's all this pressure to cave and all these things, and that's what they're dealing with. Another interesting thing about Malachi is that it ends the Christian Old Testament, but Chronicles is the last book in the Jewish Tanakh. Is there maybe some anti-Semitic motivations there as we lead into the New Testament and Jesus being crucified by some of the religious leaders? Possibly. Something just to think about. But Malachi's format is this question and answer format of God bringing these accusations before people, the people being like, what? How are we doing that? How is there an accusation against us? And then God saying, here it is. Here's what I have against you. What? Here it is. Here's what you've been doing. So let's take a look at a few of those and kind of dive in to Malachi. And so let's look at chapter 3, verses 6 through 12. I, the Lord, do not change, so you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. Ever since the time of your ancestors, you have turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. But you ask, how are we to return? Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and the vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before it is ripe, says the Lord Almighty. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. So this is not about giving to God and then getting rich, although that may be conveyed in culture and our readings of this specific passage. That's not what it's talking about at all. It's talking about you Israelites are being apathetic, and your goings about, your dealings with me, you are going through the motions, you show no interest, and you don't believe the things that are working. But they are. You can't lose hope. You got to have your heart in it. You can't go through the motions. Our walk with God cannot be apathetic. And heart posture matters in so many things that we do and how we interact with God and with people. And heart posture can honestly be the difference between sin and obedience with God. And so It matters. We cannot have a apathetic walk or just be complacent or have no interest and go through the motions. And so, in this, being surrounded by all this cultural pressure, them losing their identity, losing hope, and being forced in a way to assimilate by cultural buy-ins and all of these things that look attractive or are appealing, um, there are a faithful few. And what they do is they write a remembrance scroll so that they won't forget the promises of God and they can turn their heart posture back. Um, and that's what happens, is that they do this. And it's very admirable. And this place takes place in chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. On the day when I act, says the Lord Almighty, they will be my treasured possession. I will spare them, just as a father has compassion and spares his son who serves him. And you will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. And so, much like the Jews under Persian rule here, um, are we in America. All these cultural pressures causing us to cave or to buy in or assimilate and lose our identity and lose who God has called us to be in this world. We must be in the world, we must interact with people, but we must not be of the world. We must be different, we must be set apart. And maybe we need to write a remembrance scroll and remember the promises of God and look forward to them so that we can walk better in obedience through hard cultural pressure. It's so tempting, so easy to want to buy in. But it's our obedient walk, our faithfulness that needs to persevere. And so I want to leave you with a few things to reflect on and to think about. What cultural things cause us to drift? Drift from God, drift from our identity, to lose hope. What are you doing to not bend the knee to culture and to buy in? Are you currently acting, speaking, even dressing different than culture? Or do you look no different than the rest of the world? And what can you do to resist cultural pressure and remember God's promises? That's what I want to leave you with to reflect on. And if I haven't seen you already by the time this video releases, I'll see you in a few days. Welcome back to campus and have a great rest of your week.